It looks like the end of a shift. 2 miners, 2 butties, walking home to terraced houses, just as countless thousands like them have done before. Only now in the Rhondda, with no working pits left, they're walking out of the past, out of time. As working miners, they too are now just trace memories of a vanished age, chroniclers of their own lives in their own lives, and of the story of Rhondda's people.
The first day you start in the ground, the walk, the dust, the noise, and the men's sweat, and the humour, and the joking, and all these things stay in your mind. And looking back at it, okay, perhaps could have got better, perhaps we could have done a lot better, you know, but nevertheless, I mean, the men I work with, if I had my time over again, I wouldn't hesitate, I'd do the same thing again, you know.
If you're looking at traces in this valley behind us now of what this, you know, where industry was, you won't find a lot because it's all been landscaped and terrace. But if you look deep into this valley, I'm talking quarter mile underground, that's where the Rhondda has been, you know, raped, sort of thing. You know, the guts have been worked out of this valley, you know. That's where all the work was done in the Rhondda, quarter mile underground.
Coal mining, first in levels dug into the hillside, later in deep sunk pits, brought hordes into these valleys a century ago. But above all those new Rhondda people, on the mountain plateaus, were already echoes of a much earlier people, one whose Iron Age existence, centuries old and almost unimaginable to us now, is still evoked by these ruined hillside forts, by these mossy stones. And their voices sometimes drift in the wind amongst the mountain grasses. A prehistory, a time before coal, as well as a time after coal. We know what Rhondda looked like just before the coal rush began. Travellers talk of alpine scenery, of richly wooded slopes and tumbling glass rivers. The few hundred who lived on the slopes above the streams kept sheep, some cattle, worked as craftsmen, farmed above the valley bottom. This unexpected, hidden Rhondda still lingers too, at Fynandoin, amongst the steep streets of Clydach Vale.
Well, it was built in the 17th century, and the people that lived here were serfs, which meant that they lived all under one roof with the animals. They went through from the big room to the animals and fed them, and the fireplace was at the side of where they walked through, so they kept themselves warm and they kept the animals warm. And there was no light of any kind, so there were no windows in the house because there was a tax on light, and so the only light they had was when they opened their front door. The stairs are stone, and the only access is to go for furniture to go up is through the roof in the big room.
Land to live on became land to live by.
They bought the land to sink the colliery, and in order for the men to find place to live, they had to build houses, so they sold them the land.
It was in the lower Rhondda at Dinas 150 years ago that the coal bonanza really began. It is the suddenness of the growth that still stuns. An immemorial landscape was now swiftly honeycombed with tunnels and shafts, rifted by pickaxes, and dotted about with the rap and spin of the pithead wheel. By the end of the last century, the first phase of expansion was almost complete, and every valley township, from Trehavod to Blaen Rhondda, from Porth to Mardy, was settled around collieries, the names of whose coal seams were as familiar as family names: Chimneys, Hooters, Steam. All declared the Rhondda valleys as the greatest steam coal valleys the world had ever seen. Railways rattled day and night to carry the coal to the ports of Cardiff and Barry, and hence across the globe, wherever the British Empire chose to raise steam. Underground, the human cost was proving just as prodigious.
When pits were first sunk in the Rhondda, and the first drum of coal came out to the Rhondda in 1812, when Napoleon retreated from Moscow, kids were working in conditions like this. At air doors. Air doors are there because they're there to deflect the air to the place where it's needed most. And that's the coal face, of course. Kids as young as 7 and 8-year-old came down the pit with something like this. Not as refined as this, as a matter of fact. The first Davy lamps were perfected very back in the beginning of the century, and that's what they used these Davy lamps for, was to sit there at the door waiting for the horse to come along with an empty or a full drum of coal, of course, responsible to make sure that that air door or the ventilation doors were closed at all times. Children, ill-educated, lacking in nourishment, stunted growth, children that were able to record to the teachers, presumably, or chapels, that they came underground and they were burnt. They took that for granted, that they were going to get burnt. So children recorded history a long time back in the beginning of the Rhondda, that they were burnt in atmospheres that were absolutely unbelievable and atrocious.
Rhondda attracted capital and labour in equal measure. Coal owners like the Scotsman Archibald Hood were something more than industrial titans. Llwynapere, the magpie's nest, was blackened into modern life by Hood's Scotch colliery, and the settlement was then expanded and filled with workers who came to Wales for his Glamorgan colliery workings. This life was never really made rural again, even by the mansion set in the trees at Glyn Cornel. But Rhondda's industrial life was still rooted in a Welsh culture.
My family came to the Rhondda about the middle of the last century. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was a builder, and he was following the boom in the mining industry, and he came from West Wales into the Swansea Valley, then came to Aberdare, and then crossed to the Rhondda Fach, building houses all the way, and then he came to Treorchy. But my grandmother came from the Merthyr area, and in the last century, most of the people, the second half of the last century, came into the Rhondda. They were Welsh born.
As late as the 1850s, there were less than 1,000 inhabitants in the Rhondda. Within 60 years, there would be 150 times that number. They came from far as well as near. Workers from the rest of Britain and beyond, attracted by this thriving world.
When my mother was a Belgian, she came over years ago with her stepfather to open a brachy shop, the old Italian cafes. And her mother died, so she went back to Belgium, and she was in Belgium then during the First World War. Well, her brother, older than her, came back then after the war to take over the brachy shop and brought my mother back with her. And of course in those days all the footballers, all the young men used to go in these brachy shops. He met my mother, and that's it. They got married, and I'm the result.
The first Italian vendor of hot drinks and cold ices in the Rhondda was one Giulio Brachi. With a grace and economy typical of this bustling place, every subsequent Italian cafe was given the same name.
I was born over the shop here, and if you can picture the scene, my father downstairs working behind the coffee machine, the clanking of the old till and the coffee machine hissing away psst, all the time, and there's a shout upstairs, "Hey Serafino, your wife's just given birth to twin boys." So he rushed upstairs and brought us down and baptized us under the coffee machine, Mario and Aldo, in nomine Patris Filius Sanctus. And I've been behind the counter ever since, and I think I'll be taken out from here when my day comes.
If you spoke to anyone in the Rhondda and you were going to a cafe, you weren't going to either Bacchettas or Capaninis or whatever the case may be. It was you'd be going to a Brachi. The reason being is that Brachi were the first Italians to open in the Rhondda. They could see that there was this future for them, and they became an integrated part of the community. It's an accepted thing that if you go into any small valley town, even today, you will find an Italian cafe. And I think we are very similar in a lot of ways. We enjoy conversation, we enjoy talking to each other, we like the social aspect of life. I think the mountains attracted us as well, because the area that we came from was a mountainous area, which is Bardi, where 90% of the Italians in the Rhondda did originate.
A century ago, Rhondda was growing so fast it didn't have names for all its streets, nor record of all its people. Those citizens needed to be registered to become voters, to elect a council, to influence the social structure of the place, to provide education for the growing army of the young. From the outset, higher goals were not neglected. Rhondda had its secondary schools, its intermediate schools, and nothing speaks more forcefully of the dreams of our Rhondda forebears than their willingness to labour hard for the right to play, for the chance for others to change, and that labour was often done in the knowledge of its physical danger.
Just before 1894, that's going back 100 years, there were many pits being opened in the Rhondda Valley, and I can only suggest one that was the Tynewydd colliery, which is only a matter of 300 yards from where we're standing at the moment. And in 1877 there was the most appalling disaster there, a flood and then fire and explosion, and there were people trapped and there were lots of accidents with the rescuers, etc. But you know, there wasn't even a hospital or a clinic in the Rhondda at the time that could see to any of the injured people. They had to be cared for at a vestry of a local chapel, which was only a matter of 100-150 yards from the colliery. And they realised then that within a matter of about 3 or 4 years, even after the Tynewydd, there was another disaster up the Rhondda Vach in Anasir, between Anasir and Watstown. And the same position happened, that the miners had to be cared for and then, of course, taken down to the Cardiff Royal Infirmary. And they realised that there was need for a hospital here in the valleys, and this was the very first hospital to be built in 1894.
Tom Parker, OBE, who lost his sight as a boy, benefited from this early provision of health care and so led a full and rewarding life.
There was no work at all in the valley for any blind person, because you had to be fit. You had to, if you're a man, you worked in a pit. 50,000 in 60 pits. So that there was no job at all. And they called a meeting of the miners, Lord's delegates, put the case to them that there was need. A lot of miners had lost their sight in the pits, no jobs for them. They'd had to move to Cardiff or to Swansea. And they agreed to set up the Rhondda Institute for the Blind, have a penny a week deducted from their pay, 1990, and for 1923 they had opened a 3-storey factory employing 70 blind people in Llwynarpia. The man who worked, he was covered for medical purposes by his national insurance contribution. But then they had a system known as poundage. They would pay 3p in the pound to the local doctor or the doctor's service, and that would provide free medical treatment for the whole of his family, his wife and children. So that if you were ill, you didn't have to pay anything, because the money went in while you worked. And that's when Bevan always said he believed the health service should be such that you paid when you worked and you didn't pay when you couldn't. And that was the whole of the Rhondda was built up like that.
Serving the whole of the community. But by 1892, in the 30 years between 1860 and 1892, it grew from 7 to 112 chapels. And by 1905, the year of the revival, there were 151 chapels in the Rhondda. And according to a report of the time, there was a seating capacity of 85,105. So you can see the strength of nonconformity at that time.
And that strength made the chapels a focus for social and cultural life.
There was something going on in every chapel practically every night of the week. The village life more or less rotated around the chapel at that time. There was prayer meeting, sisterhood, sayet or gyfaillach, discussion groups, as you would say, and Band of Hope.
I had to go to Band of Hope and chapel on a Sunday 3 times a day. On a Sunday. Then there was no going for a walk after chapel on your own. You had to go with your mother and father. And that was only up to see somebody's gardens. Lotments. My father was working on the railway and he started work at 17, and you had to be a member of the chapel before you could have a job there on the railway. And all the big seats, as we used to call it, they were all drivers and firemen that were in the big seat. I can always remember that. And nearly all the shopkeepers in Turbot used to go to that chapel because they thought they were somebody.
Every chapel was allocated a month in the chapel, in the hall, and they either put on a play or a cantata, and of course the cantatas were the product of the Band of Hope. There was no other attractions more or less in Mardy, only the pictures. Not very many people went to pictures at that time, but everything went around the chapel.
But there were other consolations in this confined world. There were public houses, some hotels with palatial pretension, others just drinking dens, and they slaked another kind of thirst. The socially conscious, buoyed up by Victorian respectability and Welsh Sabbatarian teetotalism, strove to offer to colliers an alternative to outright prohibition. Coffee shops, temperance bars and soft-flavoured drinks, cherryade, American cream soda and apple crush brewed for sweetness rather than strength. The Welsh Hills, in William Evans's effervescent mind, were to be alive with the sound of pop.
William Evans, at the early age of 21, was the owner of a shop in Hannah Street in Porth. And one might have assumed that this would have been the height of a young man's ambitions. But not so William Evans. William Evans had dreams, and dreams which were not to be fulfilled without some kind of stimulus. And it was said that on one occasion he was standing behind his counter in Hannah Street, Porth, when the most unlikely visitor appeared in Hannah Street. We today would be familiar with the sort of person. We'd have seen him on television, dressed as a cowboy from Galveston. It was said that he had left Galveston at pistol point. He had a dubious past. He was reckoned to be one of the early frontier medicine men, selling an Indian remedy which was a cure for all complaints. And he fired William Evans with enthusiasm for the idea of manufacturing mineral waters or pop. Well, the original name which William Evans chose for his soft drinks was Welsh Hills. And undoubtedly he was influenced by possibly two arguments. Number one, that the industry had started in the Welsh Hills, both in the Rhondda here, and also by the fact that the Welsh Hills water would convey the impression of purity. But when business expanded, when the factories began springing up all over England as well, it seemed then, when there were 187 of them, that the name of Welsh Hills was inappropriate. So he held a competition in order to decide on what the new name of his drink should be. And it appears that, possibly influenced by the fact that the crown is the top, that he chose the title Corona. And of course Corona drinks they've been ever since. And Corona is associated with the tremendous expansion of the William Evans empire. The logo was often presented as a crown made up of bottles of different colours of pop.
The pop man's weekly visit around the streets was eagerly anticipated, a little fizz for when times were harder. And the swing from prosperity and expectation could be sudden. In 1910, the very name of Tonypandy became infamous, associated with riot and mayhem, as a strike of the 12,000 colliers in the Cambrian Combine spilled over the limits of industrial relations, brought imported police and troops to the streets of Mid-Rhondda for over a 12-month, and all at the behest of the then Liberal Home Secretary Winston Churchill. The Tonypandy riots signal above all else that consensus and moderation in politics and industrial relations was at an end for liberal Edwardian Wales. An era was drawing to a close then, even if it was not obvious at the time. The First World War initially brought the coal industry and the numbers working in it in the Rhondda to a heightened pitch. And during that war, the tank that rumbled through Rhondda with the unlikely name of Egbert collected for the war effort. But it was a war that claimed Rhondda lives by the score, as indifferently as any underground explosion. What the soldiers returned to seemed, at first sight, to be a world of work resumed. It was an illusion. But for a while, in the early 1920s, the pattern was repeated. Collier boys followed in their father's footsteps down the pit.
And we walked towards that entrance. And I walked through that entrance at the beginning, and all of a sudden the water began to drop from my head. And then my clothes, which were clean before I came, started to go dirty, and they were dropping down to my legs. And then the flat finished, and then I started to go down and down and down and down. I goes right down until we came to a flat at the bottom.
The knowledge mothers and fathers had, the reality they lived through, led them in every fibre of their being to want an alternative life for their children. But for most, to live, there was no choice.
We were 7 kids, and only Dad working, obviously struggling. He didn't want me to go down the pit. He didn't want one of us to go down. We were 3 boys actually, but he wanted one of us down the pit. But anyway, I went down the pit.
On and on we walked, until we walked about approximately 1.5 miles. And then my father said, "No, hang on by you now." And I could see a horse, and a big white horse. And the ollier was there, and he said, "Hello, Di, you brought him in today, have you?" And then, of course, "Come on, Tom, come with me now. I'll show you the place." And I walked down this first road, and it is dipping down, and it goes down to the face. And when it goes down to the face, I could only see 6 inches of coal I could see. But when I went further, I was 1 foot 6 in water myself. It was full of water. And my father said, get out of there, he said. You're going too fast. And he called the ollier and he said, bring something down here to get this water out.
It was all prehistoric work. You were working with a mandrel and a shovel. You were cutting coal with just a mandrel, right? And then you dragged it back in a box and put it into drums. And if you filled about 4 or 5 drums in your day, you were doing all right. I was working in about that height at that time, 2'4".
The collier's day, in terrible conditions often, was about skill and graft, and it was long.
On the way out, I'm walking and walking and walking, and then I get to the bottom before going to the surface. And in the distance, I could see the light. And as I walked and walked, it grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I came to the top and it came out right into the sunshine. And it was a beautiful day. My mother was waiting at the bottom. "How did it go, Tom?" "No bad, ma'am, but I felt rotten. I went in, I had a bath in front of the fire, I had some food, and I went to bed, and I didn't rise the next morning."
There was one sound that would be worse than the whistle of the hooter, and that was the silence which afflicted the Rhondda when the mass unemployment of the 1920s proved immovable.
We've been told for many ages that our business is to work for the old starvation wages paid to us by those who shirk. But a feeling now is rising that those days have gone for aye, and the workers are surprising all the bosses when they say, when the boss starts working after years of shirking, we will get the new world that we're striving for. All we'll make, we'll keep, then dogs of war will sleep, then come along and join our ranks in the old class war.
It was pretty tough for all families in the Rhondda because the men weren't working for about 6 months in 1921. Then we had the lockout in 1926. That was another 6 months. Well, there was no financial assistance available for the men, and the miners' lodges had run out of money very early, you see. But the co-op, they were able to borrow from the Cooperative Wholesale Society nationally and use that money to pay for the food that they were buying and they were selling. They weren't selling it to us, they were giving it us. And all they asked was that after the strike, we would stay spending with them, so that they, instead of giving us dividend for a couple of years, they could use what would have been paid out as dividend to discharge their debt to the CWS.
During the Depression years, the 1920s, everybody in Mardy they were in the same boat, same circumstances, and nearly everybody took in either lodges or what we call apartments, another family, to help to subsidise the rents and the rates. So my mother took in, well, families. There was one family with 4 children. Well, our house has got 4 bedrooms, so they had 2 bedrooms. The father and mother were in one, the 4 children were in another bedroom, then my mother and father was in one bedroom, and then I was in the very smallest room of the house. But honest, everyone did it to gather in a bit of extra money.
I used to buy a sheep's head and some beef and boil it and put gelatine in it and pressed it, and then when it was cold and hard, they used to slice it. And we used to have that with make a dinner or for a tea time.
The men used to go up and dig levels into the mountain to get coal, because you found levels dug all over the mountains. They get coal down. Probably sell a bag for 6 months just to get some money. They used to use leaves from the railways, bake it in an oven to smoke. That's known as back or die. It used to smell horribly, but we used to use it to smoke things because we couldn't afford to buy them. But we managed to keep together.
And you appreciate the health of the mothers, especially, were suffering at this time, because the mothers, being so generous, they would go without, especially food, so that the children could have an extra helping, and it was to make its toll on their health. And many a mother had to be brought into hospital suffering from anemia and malnutrition. And of course, with that, what follows, of course, babies are born with different deformities, and rickets was the name that came up on medical records, and it was affecting the unborn child and then the child after it was born.
Well, they used to go to the soup kitchens, didn't they? We never went. So I think because my father wasn't on strike. He was on the railway. So the miners were on strike then. And we wouldn't go to the soup kitchens, but we couldn't go because and of course I used to get mad because I wanted to go to the soup kitchens like the other children to have soup or whatever they were having from there. But we couldn't go.
You know, we had to survive somehow. We had soup kitchens. When I was a child, we had to go to the local soup kitchens. I had a pair of boots given me once by parcels that were sent to Mardy for the underprivileged. And I had to wear the boots. They were lace-up boots, and I wore them.
The thing I remember most of all that hit me was with the unemployed, and there were organisations in London helping to collect old clothes to send down, and the Central Hall in Tonopandi was a distribution point. And how it hurt the pride of those men to have to go there to pick up an old suit, old pair of boots, something like that. They didn't want it, but they had to do it.
For the Rhondda, the years between the wars was a long march.
When the school holidays came, we took to the mountain tops, joining the liberated pit ponies among the ferns on the broad plateau. That was the picture for us who were young. But for our fathers and mothers, there was the enclosing fence of hinted fears, fear of hunger, fear of defeat. And then, out of the quietness and the golden light, partly to ease their fret, a new excitement was born. The carnivals and the jazz bands.
The experience was truly an incredible one. The carnivals and the later hunger marches were as much about mutual support as they were about play or protest. These trace memories of the 20s and 30s have never left Rhondda minds and hearts, and no one ever recalled it better than Gwyn Thomas, and no one was more scornful of the Technicolor Hollywood version. Yet before How Green Was My Valley worked its particular myth and magic, the cinema had brought to the Rhondda a film hero as emblematic as its own life. Paul Robeson, whose progressive politics had led him to an acquaintance with miners, and who made Proud Valley just as another world war came to alter Rhondda lives yet again.
I remember the Americans. I remember the Americans coming here before D-Day, playing in the street. I remember them playing with these great big... I'd never seen a glove as big as that in my life, a huge glove. They were playing...
baseball.
They were playing baseball, you know. And then they used to form up and march up to a place where they all had food, and they were very generous. That's what the term any gum chum. And the kids would go running up the street after the American soldiers, you know, soldiers out in any gum chum. Apparently, a lot of the American boys that were stationed in the valleys died in the big assaults on the Omaha beaches, you know.
Only a stoical people could live through yet another round of human disaster on this scale. Sudden and mass death, even in peacetime, had cursed Rhondda, even in Rhondda. Yet, day by day, the constant toll of accidents underground was met with a counterpointing humour.
In a coal mine, all first aid trained men could administer a pain-relieving drug called pethidine. We're the only civilians who can do it, I understand, you know. On the surface, it's a doctor or a state-registered nurse. But we got this power in the coal mines. And we have a casualty out here on a stretcher, splintered up, ready to take out. And of course we need volunteers now to carry this man out. Well, there's always an abundance of volunteers to carry a stretcher case out, because it means an early shift, you know. But they'll ask a question first at the coal face. They say, is he a big one or a little one? You know, if it's a big one, there's not many coming forward as quick as they would if it's a small one. So then we might up, you know. And humour comes into that situation straight away, you know, because it's going to take about 3 hours to get this casualty out from the mine, you know. And we want to stop him going into shock. And some of the things that the boys say to him to wind him up, you know, to keep his spirits up then, is unbelievable, you know. And if it's a youngster who's had an accident, you know, he might be on a stretcher ready to be taken out, and the boys will say, well, them trainers were a waste of money, weren't they? He'd been crutches for 6 months, you know, I'll give you £20 for him. You know, and he said, oh, but this humour's kept up all the way out, you know. And if the accident happened before he's had his lunch, you know, we carry our food underground in tin boxes to stop the mice eating him, you know. Well, the boys have opened his Tommy box, you know, they're eating his sandwiches and saying things like, do I'm on a Friday, you know, she must think the world of you, you know, and but this humour is carried on all the way out, you know. It's unbelievable to describe, really, unless you've been involved in mining, you know.
We could go on for hours talking about the things where I come home from work and my mother said to me, why are you holding your stomach? Because I've been laughing so much. Just imagine coming out of a seam less than a yard high with water in it, bad roof, walking 2.5 miles to get to the coalface in heat and things like that, and coming home and holding your stomach because you've been laughing so much. So how can you possibly put the two together? You know, there should be a contradiction, you know, the grim past. But no, miners were a superb bunch of men.
There was indeed an unquenchable appetite for fun. Mountainside picnics, trips to the sea, buses and trains organised with the precision of an army on the march. The Rhondda actor Glyn Houston shows how the Rhondda writer Gwyn Thomas elaborated on the Rhondda exodus to the sea.
Now, on the day, the station was like a scene from Babylon. A real crisis. Because, you see, a number of chapels would go on the same day, at the same time. It was then that the local station master reached the heights of joy. No cooperation, no sympathy, no feelings at all for the Great Western Railway. Look at them. The biggest gathering of Christians since the revival of 1904. And all wanting to go to Barry on the same train. And there's no love or trust among you. If one chapel went on its own, the others would be back home praying for heavy rain.
You go into chapel a month before the Barry trip, you know, to qualify, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
To go in there with there was a chapel at the end of our street, and we all, you know, the excitement of going to Barry, you know, and always seemed to be raided when I go to Barry. A banana sandwiches and egg. By the time you got to Barry, they'd be black as banana was, you know.
We always had our heads out of the windows on the train going to Barry, and always, oh, I can see the sea, I can see the sea. It was always the first one to see the sea. Of course, some people used to say that the steam from the engine was good for chest trouble. I don't know much about that.
The slogan for each compartment was, push 'em in as tight as you can. We can always winkle you out of the woodwork in Barry. Now, this explains the superb breath control of many Rhondda vocalists. It's true. Because on a really crowded day, they would inhale deeply in Pennygry. Then they wouldn't breathe out again until they got to Barry.
The expanse of sands on Barry Island became as familiar to generations of pleasure seekers as the valley streets themselves.
Well, the Rhondda, when I was a kid, was an adventurous place to be in, you know. I mean, on an autumn day like today now, well, you wouldn't see nothing like we've got behind us today now. Because the soil would be over this valley, would be a big sheet of white smoke. Because not only was the coal mines belching out smoke to produce the steam for the winders, every household here was burning coal, you know. And as kids, what we would do, I mean, we like walking in fog, really, you know. And on an autumn day like today, we'd get up on top of the mountains, you know, above the sort of smoke line, you know. And you could really walk really. It looked like a lake, you know. And up on top of the smoke line, we called it as kids, you know, you'd find people sitting, you know, old miners. I'm talking about people now, when I was a kid back about 1952, you know, and these men were in their 80s, you know. And as small kids, you know, we'd sit with them because they all knew us, you know, and we'd listen to them talking, you know, and the things they talked about was unbelievable, you know. It was alien to us, really, you know. I remember one particular case, sitting talking to old men, having blind Fleckei, and they were talking about Attila the Hun, you know, and things like that, you know, and Genghis Khan, you know. Well, I thought, good God, what are they on about, you know? But later on, when you got older books, you know, but these people had knowledge of things like that, you know. I mean, that's all I knew about Attila the Hun was when I seen Jack Palance in a film, you know, in the late 50s, and I thought, good God, you know, and I was listening to these men, and they were arguing, debating, you know. I learned more, really, outside of school than what I did in school, really, you know. And the people we learned from was these older miners, you know, who had access to books in the miners' libraries, you know.
The first history we have got is of the river civilizations,
yes.
The sewers,
yes.
Particularly the Euphrates,
yes.
And they were confined within their own areas owing to particular geographical conditions. The sea and the sun protected them from what they termed marauding tribes.
The Rhondda had its self-taught philosophers and historians, and the miners' institutes were the brains of the valley, proud bastions of rational thought and social promise in a world devoid of both sense and sympathy, places to practice politics and also rehearse pleasures. Park and Dare, a huge gesture of hope in 1913, is still used today for film, discussion and theatre.
It was either cowboy films and you went down the street like that, and it was Tarzan, or there was war films. If you went, and if it was a war film about the Air Force, John Wayne and all that, the Flying Tigers, you came out down the street like this, and the first, always one of the boys, you know, always the first to get killed, you know, laying on the floor. I mean,
but the pictures were our escape. It was brilliant, it was, you know, because I mean, in Ferndale we had a marvellous choice. We had two picture houses, you know, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday would be, you know, one film, Thursday, Friday and Saturday would be another film, you know.
That's right.
And we had a marvellous choice. I remember you going to pictures every night of the week, really, you know. Get threepence to go, you know, we do anything, you know, chop wood for old people, just get, you know, a tanner to go to pictures, didn't we?
Yeah.
And not just cinema. The Judges' Hall in Tonopandi was in the 1950s a mecca for jiving teenagers, somewhere to go out of that incessant Rhondda rain. And music, from oratorios to rock and roll, led by world-famous male-voiced choirs and prize-winning brass bands with wind and vocal power in music hall and opera and in every form in between and all through, has reverberated in the life of Rhondda and dispelled the gloom of that reign. For a time in the 1940s and 50s, mining life seemed assured, if depleted, but the industry really was a vanishing one, and struggle marked its end. The strikes of 72 and 74 were national victories for the NUM. That of 1984-85 was a community rebellion as much as a strike.
The women of the Rhondda are out on the picket line to stop the coal boat's closure plan and save the Mardy mine, fighting for our children and the town where we belong. You'll hear their voices singing, we are women, we are strong, oh Mardy.
We are still fighting, the fight is still flicking on, but we are still proud as wives to march up this pit road with our husbands. They can hold their heads up, we can hold ours up, and the fight is still on.
People were not defeated, but the industry's end was inexorable. And at Mardy, within a year, the march from the last pit in the Rhondda was as moving an occasion as even these valleys have seen.
It was a most eerie type of day. It was very early in the morning. There had been a service up on top of the pit and top of the colliery, and the place was crowded, very, very full up there. And there were quite a number of hundreds of people up there. And they all walked back, after the service ended, they all walked back to Mardy, from the top of the pit, back to Mardy. And the street where I live is the last street before going to the colliery then. And it was a very misty, foggy morning, and all you could hear was the tramping of feet coming down. No band, nothing. Just the people walking down from the colliery. The people who'd gone up there to go to the service, and some of the miners as well. And all you could hear was a tramp of feet until they suddenly came into sight. And our street was full of people. They'd come up from the bottom of Mardy to come see them coming down the street. It was the most eerie atmosphere that I've ever experienced then. It was a wonderful experience, and yet it was a sad experience to think that the colliery had finished, that it was the end of an era.
Sights and sounds will linger in the landscape and in the mind. It's not only inevitable, it's right that older generations should consider their lives, should look back for us with a wistful pride on the way perhaps they built those lives against hard odds. It's a history that requires a sense of heritage. Rhondda's landscape today, greened over and beautiful once again in so many ways, is still freighted with a heavy significance. Green sites, yes, but sites where colliery wheels once filled the horizon. But more than anything of Rhondda today is a sense of the power of community. To talk of community and of civilization in the Rhondda is not mere rhetoric, because the living reality is all around us still. The coal may have gone, but the people and their culture still remain, and the generations still connect, old and young, a sense of togetherness stitched together by memory and by a lived experience which few other communities in the world have ever come to. The Rhondda has seen so much itself that it has a sense of obligation, of responsibility, of duty. When you say the word Rhondda, you say the word humanity. You mean something, and the world knows it. The new century that beckons Rhondda will inevitably be one of change. It will also be one of vitality, one where sport and other elements of Rhondda life that Rhondda people have always enjoyed will revitalise the valley and take it to fresh fields. New housing has settled with surprising ease into the folds of these old hills, but then it has always been a welcoming landscape. And today it is a place that outsiders will testify to be one of stunning beauty. To the people of the Rhondda itself, I think it will above all be remembered as a place of unique taste and personality, a world they made.
You know, the Rhondda has a very lively rhythm now. I think it's come back to what it was in the original days. It used to be, before the coal industry came, it was a very tranquil, quiet place. And now, well, then the mines came and scarred the valley. There was a lot of work, a lot of industry here. But now it's come back again to its natural state.
The fame of Rhondda Valleys will exist for very, very many years, long into the next century, as an industrial area, at a place to produce the coal that we talk about, but also the place to produce a great, courageous, very, very proud people.